Hello everyone, it's Steve with Aptera Owners Club. I wanted to talk a little bit about battery chemistry and mining in this video. You guys remember back from June of last year, that's when Aptera announced that they were partnering with Eve Energy to supply their batteries. Now we know now that they have several other battery suppliers that they're talking to, and so Eve will not be their only supplier. But the chemistry that they're going with is NMC 811. This stands for nickel, manganese, cobalt 811. 811 basically tells you the ratio of the three metals in the battery. So it's a lithium ion battery, but the chemistry of the lithium ion battery is nickel, manganese, cobalt, with eight, the majority being nickel. So 8 is nickel, 1 is manganese, and 1 is cobalt. So an 8-1-1 ratio of those three elements. And that was good because cobalt is mainly mined in the Congo, and the mining is very dirty and unhealthy. And there's been a lot of talk about child labor in that kind of mining of the cobalt. So cobalt is problematic, and so we want to minimize cobalt use. But nickel also is problematic. I saw this recent article in The Economist, and it's talking about new technology could cement Indonesia's dominance of vital nickel. So Indonesia is the major producer globally of nickel by a wide margin. If you look at this graph here, Indonesia currently operates more than half the world's nickel production. So here's Indonesia, and here's everyone else in the world. And then under construction, Indonesia is planning to go up to this much metric tons per year, 3 million metric tons. And then the rest of the world is adding only on a little bit. And the problem is that this is what nickel mining looks like. It looks like this. And if you look at, it's just basically strip mining. And Indonesia is a very, has a ton of biodiversity. They're finding new species of birds and insects and animals there pretty much every month. And this kind of mining not only destroys like waters and the land, but it kills biodiversity. So there is an environmental and a cultural cost to mining nickel. Currently, most nickel is actually formed from this thing called limonite. So limonite is a type of iron ore. It's an iron oxide, and the limonite that's found in Indonesia has nickel in there. And they basically get it out through this process called a rotary kiln electric furnace. This is a very, very energy intense process where they heat the metal to extremely high temperatures and melt it down. So most of this power is generated through coal-fired power plants, and it generates a ton of carbon emissions during the refining of this nickel ore. And the other problem is that most of this limonite is disappearing, and most of it has already been found and has been it's been called for. Like, people have called dibs on it. So there's no more really limonite out there that hasn't been discovered. And a lot of this was shipped to China, and Indonesia has now put a moratorium on shipping more of this ore to China, and they're going to control the refining of the ore in-house. But there is this new kind of ore called saprolite, which is basically this decomposed bedrock that's underneath the cell surface right here. But this is a lower grade ore, and you can't just melt it down. And you have to use this thing called, let me see if I can find it. Okay, well, here's another graph showing how nickel demand is going to go up over time. So here in 2020, look at the blue bar. The blue bar is EVs and battery storage. So this is the amount of nickel that's expected to be used in the EV and battery sector. And as you can see, it's a very small portion of the pie in 2020. with the most being in this yellow, which is all the other sectors. And this is, like a lot of metallurgy and things like that. But as you go on, you see that the blue becomes um, dominant user of nickel. So it is very important that that's what's going on. Let me see if I can find the thing about. Wait, here you go. So the saprolite is refined using this thing called high pressure acid leach technology. What they do here is they take the ore and they slurry it with water, and then they leach it with sulfuric acid at 250 degrees Celsius. So it's heated, so it takes some energy, but not nearly the amount of energy that the other process takes. However, what this does is it generates a lot of toxic waste because you're just basically making a ton of sulfuric acid and leached metals, heavy metals, and things like that out of that. And so that's called tailings. And the tailings, you can do one of three things with it. You can put it in a dam, or you can dry it and stack it, or you can dump it in the ocean. Now, obviously, dumping in the ocean is really bad for the ocean, and Indonesian government has banned that as a way of managing the tailings. And currently, they're drying it and stacking it, but that's they're going to run out of space to dry it and stack it. So they probably need to make dams to hold it back until it dries out on its own. But making dams in Indonesia is problematic because there's a lot of earthquake, seismic activity, and volcanic activity, which would make dams a little bit subject to failing. But this is what they're moving towards. So this is going to happen. In order to get nickel, they're going to use this technique. And if you look at this, there has been some concerns of these things leaching out and polluting rivers in the area and things like that. So not only do you have the habitat loss from the strip mining of the land, you also have water degradation and things like that. So we want to minimize the use of any of these minerals. And there's nothing that we do that has no impact. So clearly manufacturing batteries and getting the materials for the batteries has a lot of environmental impact. This doesn't mean that it's bad. It's worse than gas, because we know that petroleum mining and petroleum refining is even worse than this in terms of both environmental costs, habitat loss, water pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. So across the board, it's worse. But this is not a get out of jail free card. So I think the thing that's important to know about this is when we pick battery size, you want to pick the lowest battery size that does the job that you want it to do, because you want to minimize this kind of activity. And that's what's the beauty of Aptera, is because with the same battery size, you can have much more range, 3 to 4 to, if you compare it to a Hummer, like 8 times more range per the same battery size, which is why things like the Hummer is ridiculous, because it requires huge batteries to get even a decent amount of range. The other thing that's good is that new chemistries are coming up, like sodium ion batteries. I think that's going to come onto the market in the next couple of decades and probably will obviate the needs for this kind of stuff. And also LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate batteries, have less of these problems as well. So there hopefully is going to be a transition to some of these more friendly chemistries in the batteries. But just something to keep an eye on and be aware of, that there is a huge environmental cost to both nickel and cobalt mining, as well as lithium mining. Lithium mining has its own set of issues. But I thought that was a really interesting article, and I wanted to talk to you guys about it. And I learned a lot about how this ore was refined and the problems with mining the ore. So I thought I'd pass it along to you guys. So thanks for watching, and have a great day, everyone.